Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Joel Gilbert. Last name is spelled Gilbert. If you're watching this on X, Rockfin, or Rumble, you'll see the cover to his new film. The full title of the new film is The Climate According to AI Al Gore. I got about halfway through it. And I remember his name. I've seen his name because I watched his documentary back in that he made back in 2012 about Obama. That one was called Dreams from My Real Father, A Story of Reds and Deception, which is about Obama's dad, whose name I can't remember, but it gives a lot of background about Obama. And then also I remember hearing in the news another of his films, The Trayvon Hoax, Unmasking the Witness Fraud that Divided America. That was 2019. But this is not his first, second, or third film. He's made like 15 films. A lot of on Bob Dylan seems to be a topic of interest of his. So also one is Paul McCartney Really Dead? The Last Testament of George Harrison. I've done a lot of stuff on the Beatles, a lot of inquiries on that. Elvis Found Alive 2012. But I will put a list of his movies in the show notes if you're interested. But again, this movie was just released. Today is January 9th, 2025. During all the fires in LA, this film was released November 19th, 2024. And it's interesting because it opens with drone footage of the coast, which is where a lot of these fires are taking place, at least where we live. We're both in Southern California, and the Pacific Palisades has just been ravaged. It's really gone. But they're blaming it on climate change, right? So this is a kind of, Al Gore is the climate change guru, czar, whatever. Going back, I was looking to some pre-show research, and he was saying it in Congress in 1998. And more recently, I've commented on other shows of him having this kind of really extensive freak out over like bombs going off, like the hundreds of thousands of Hiroshimas of energy taking place in the ocean. I think he said it at the World Economic Forum, which is also sus. But Joel has done a lot of research into the subject. The movie's really interesting. I didn't know that much about Al Gore's background and some of his interesting connections, but Joel can talk more about that. So Joel Gilbert, welcome to the show.
Okay, good to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. So for people who may not have heard your name, your earlier work, maybe you can talk a little bit about your background leading up to this film, The Climate According to AI Al Gore.
Yeah, well, I made a number of films on music history, including on Bob Dylan and other music icons. I started making political documentaries back in 2007 on the Middle East politics, Farewell Israel, Atomic Jihad. And then I made the pretty well known for 2012 film Dreams from My Real Father, where I think I make the case that Obama's real father was not the Kenyan student, Barack Obama, who looks nothing like him. In fact, it's the man who raised him in Hawaii and is a Soviet agent that looks just like Obama, and Obama admits was his idol in life, was Frank Marshall Davis. And I've made films called Trump, the Art of the Insult. I made one on Michelle Obama, and a number of films. You can see them all on IMDb, or my corporate website is highway61ent.com. And the reason I got into this film was because I actually had a friend in Australia who was a member of the Libertarian Party, John Ruddick, and he had told me over Twitter how obsessed he was with Al Gore. And I said, oh, hey, I actually worked for Al Gore as a student intern when he was a U.S. Senator from Tennessee, very conservative at the time. And I was a student in Washington. And he said, oh, you'd be the perfect person to look into Al Gore because he's kind of the godfather of the climate movement. He's the one that, brought this to the world, this whole concept that there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere. We have to change the way we live to stop CO2 or we're all going to die. And so I decided to look into it. And Gore, this is his big climate manifesto he released in 1992 as a bestseller called Earth in the Balance. And in this book, and also in his 2006 film, An Inconvenient Truth, that he came out with some years later, he admits, he says, I'm no scientist, but he said, oh, I got my scientific information. You can trust it because I got it from taking a class at Harvard in 1969. I got this information from my Harvard professor. So just, you can count on it. And I was shocked to realize that no one ever even looked into it. No one ever looked into this professor to see if he even agreed with Al Gore. So sure enough, I go down to the University of San Diego archives where his professor's papers are stored. And I find the course that Al Gore took. He never told us the name of the course. The course is called Human Populations, and it was all about the world population explosion. That was the big concern at the time. And it had nothing to do with the climate whatsoever. Gore got a C in the class. And then I keep reading Roger Revelle, his professor, who does write articles about the climate. He did so for 30, 40 years. And he completely disagrees with what Gore was saying about carbon dioxide. Specifically says, don't listen to Al Gore. Look before you leap. He says more carbon dioxide might be beneficial. So I realized that Gore lied about the source of his climate science. So I started asking, well, where did he get this from? And I looked at his book, Earth in the Balance, and he's talking about it being a spiritual crisis. Everything is spiritual. It's about faith. So I look at Gore's study at Vanderbilt Divinity School, where he went in 1971 for 1 year. And Gore had these radical environmental professors at this school that was kind of a draft dodger's haven. Gore didn't go there to become a minister. He got there to get out of the Vietnam War. And also, I found this book on the curriculum that he read called Our Plundered Planet. And I read this book from the late 40s. This book basically says to people, don't worry about the nuclear arms race because humanity is destroying the earth. It's perfect, but we're cutting down too many trees. We're using too many resources. We're all going to die anyway. So I realized that Gore, I read this book and I realized he plagiarized it heavily to write his manifesto, Earth in the Balance. But when he came on the scene with it in 1992, he couldn't say, I got this science from my wacky professors and this crazy book from the 1940s that I plagiarized. He had to say, oh, I got it from Harvard to be credible. So that was the first step where I realized that Gore simply made up this premise that there's too much carbon dioxide. And I take you in the film through the whole history of Al Gore and why he would do that, and how his father, who was a U.S. senator, really raised him to be president one day. His parents raised him to be president. He was born in Washington, he's a creature of Washington. So to fulfill his parents' ambitions is one reason he came up with this thing, because he was not a good politician. He knew it. He wasn't good at talking to people. He was had no charisma. So he always created issues. And this was an issue he thought he could lead in, was environmentalism. So he did it for politics, but I think my movie blows the lid off the whole climate science narrative, because I show you that Gore simply made up this whole idea of too much carbon dioxide. And if you go to climatealgore.com, you can watch the movie trailer and link up to where you can watch the movie online or get the DVD.
Right. And so the interesting thing is I was doing a little pre-show research into this character, and there's some words in here that my audience will give pause to. Ecology, right? This is kind of like human ecology and things like that. But that's the title of his book. But Our Plundered Planet, Fairfield Osborn is an Osborn Jr. Are you aware of his dad?
Yeah, so Fairfield Osborn was a zoologist, the guy that wrote this book. He was a zoologist in New York City. He started the New York Zoological Society. His father, also by the same name, Fairfield Osborn Sr., he started the American Eugenics Society. So that's, when you look at this whole climate apocalypse thing, it goes back to these people that want to control the population. They think there's too many people and they want to get rid of people. And that's what this whole climate narrative really is all about in the end. In Europe, for example, they're cutting back on growing crops and food to achieve these climate goals and carbon dioxide goals. So there's a big group of people that are adopting this climate narrative, this climate panic. And it's all the same old scam. It's the same old people that are trying to force wealth redistribution and central planning down the throats of people that would never vote for it, under the guise of, oh, well, we're just trying to help, save the planet.
Right. They don't know this background of this Osborn guy. He was an Aryan enthusiast. He thought the Anglo-Saxons were the best, of which Al Gore, I assume, is one. So these were things that it's not surprising that he would hold on to, but they don't have the background. They're shutting down farms in the Netherlands. They're imposing costs on like carbon taxes in the UK where people can't heat their homes. This is all on this phony climate science of which Al Gore is one of the apostles. So it's so important to understand what their background is. It's really, they don't care about the environment. They're about human population control. Would you agree with that?
To some extent, look, Al Gore is not one of the apostles. He is the godfather. He's the one that brought this idea that there's too much carbon dioxide. Humans are putting too much in the atmosphere. We got to cut it back, change the way we live, change our governance, change everything. But we learned from the film, we look at what is carbon dioxide. Most climate warriors can't really tell you. But carbon dioxide, you'll learn in the film, is only 1/3 of 1% of all gas in the atmosphere. And the more you put into the atmosphere, the more gets absorbed by the oceans and the plants. Carbon dioxide is plant food. If you double the carbon dioxide to 2/3 of 1%, it just gets absorbed by the plants and you get taller trees, more crops, and greener deserts. So there were scientists that work for the US government. For example, there's one I have in the film named Sherwood Idso, and he worked for the Department of Agriculture. He's a US government scientist. And he did an experiment where he grew sour orange trees in a controlled greenhouse and exposed them to double the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And he grew another group of sour orange trees in the regular carbon dioxide environment in greenhouses. And after 5 years, the trees that had been exposed to double the carbon dioxide grew 3 times as tall, 3 times the biomass, 3 times the amount of fruit. So he concluded, we need more carbon dioxide, not less. It'll be good for the planet, good for crops, good for deserts, and good for humanity. So Al Gore would invite scientists like Sherwood Idso. He actually invited him to the US Senate committee, and Gore would attack them and say, he said to Sherwood Idso, you're working for OPEC. You're just like the cigarette manufacturers in the 1950s. You're a denier. So they created this whole cult of attacking people that don't agree with this stuff. And today there's, trillions, not just billions, but trillions being paid to scientists to agree with climate panic. UN scientists, green organizations, universities, they're all being paid to agree. But any serious scientist will tell you there's nothing to the idea that carbon dioxide controls the weather. Temperature and weather are controlled by the tilt of the earth, sunspots, clouds, about 100 different factors. Carbon dioxide has no effect on the weather, and the more we put in the atmosphere, the better off we are. And that is something that the climate scientists won't tell you.
Right. And I think the ocean is a huge CO2 sink too. So like it gets absorbed into water and things like that. Like, so it's really fear and panic, and it's really something else. So but he is not some kind of objective observer. He has a financial stake in much like the other ones in this whole climate scam, right?
Well, Al Gore's original goal was political. When he got to Congress at 26 years old in 1977, he realized he didn't have a personality for politics. So to achieve his parents' ambitions for him to become president, he realized he needed issues. So the first issue he took up was arms control. He became kind of a defense hawk, very conservative defense hawk in the 80s. And he even tried to negotiate with the Soviet Union a Minuteman missile deal. Ronald Reagan ignores Al Gore and wins the Cold War without him. And that's when in 1989, Gore realizes he needs a new issue to become president one day. And that's when he turns to environmentalism. He came out with that book in 1992 because it was considered an issue that had no downside. Democrat voters were very concerned about the environment. We had the Chernobyl disaster. We had the Exxon Valdez spill. So Gore thought, if I sharpen up this issue and make it like a really big emergency, I can be the leader of this movement and ride it all the way to the White House. But it was so extreme. He called it an apocalypse. He said we have an environmental crisis. It's a spiritual crisis. When he came out with a book, people really didn't go for it. He even got caught when he debated Dan Quayle when he was running for vice president in 1992. They actually asked him in the debate, they said, hey, your professor, your mentor, Roger Revelle, does not agree with you. Exactly what I discovered from looking at his papers. What do you have to say about that? Everything you're saying in this book, you said you got from this professor who doesn't even agree with you. And Gore lies in the debate. He says, oh, no, he was misquoted. He was not misquoted. So it didn't really take off. And it actually started out, Gore would talk about a hole in the ozone layer. That was in the 90s. He stopped talking about that because it just wasn't true. And it was also called global warming for a good 10 or 15 years till about 2006. But what happened was the winters kept getting colder. They'd have these climate conferences and they'd be snowed in. So it kept getting colder and colder. So people weren't really buying into it. That's when they used a different terminology. About 2007, they came up with the word climate change, so that any weather whatsoever, they could say, oh, well, that's climate change. Gore to this day shows up at climate conferences and he screams. He says, it was 115 degrees in Las Vegas in July, which is actually normal. But he claims that any weather pattern whatsoever is climate change. Give me all your money.
Right. So it can go both ways. Climate change is much more flexible. So like the cold or hot, whatever it is, it's extreme climate change.
Right.
Climate changes at all times.
Look, they blame everything. Look, they talk about racism being climate change, fire, earthquakes, whatever it is. They say it's climate change to justify this panic narrative because there is no real science behind it.
And it's a cover for other things too, like just like these fires in Los Angeles Basin. They're going to call it climate change and avoid competency questions and bad politics and people who are not in the right place for the job. They're just going to try to get people with the climate change narrative.
Right.
And some people buy it. So it's really been very flexible for him. He's really a creature of DC, right? Grew up in that hotel, St. Albans. Right.
Yeah, Gore, born in Washington, went to St. Albans. It's like this British boarding school in Washington where all the Kennedys and Bushes went to school. And, Gore was on the floor of the Senate with his father as a kid. He went to John Kennedy's inauguration. So he really grew up in Washington and is a creature of Washington. And I trace in the film, you learn about the role of Arm & Hammer, kind of was paying off his father, even supported Al Gore financially, all kind of shady things going on. So it's a very interesting film. It's very entertaining. There have been films about the climate hoax before, but they tend to kind of not get too much attention because they're kind of a lecture. It's kind of boring. I think this is very entertaining because I use an AI version of Al Gore in the movie. I actually interview and talk to Gore throughout the movie, but an AI version. It's video and audio. It sounds like Gore. It looks like Gore. And we get an honest depiction of his real life story and the climate science.
Right. So it is interesting, and it traces his background. That Arm & Hammer stuff, I didn't hear about. I wasn't aware of that they were involved in like cattle as a means of laundering. I've heard of clever laundering schemes, but that was a new one for me.
Yeah, you learn a tremendous amount in the film about Gore's background, which you need to do to understand why he would promote this fake science to try to get himself elected. It has since been taken over by this whole international movement. The socialist, Marxist, communists have just kind of morphed into climate warriors, and they're demanding that you create global governance and central planning and wealth redistribution. They have these climate conferences, and they get everybody to agree by letting third world countries, China and India, off the hook, and African countries, you guys don't have to do anything. And the Western countries have to send them billions of dollars. So they're like, great, let's do it. So it's one big scam, and the American taxpayer is paying for it. The Inflation Reduction Act that Biden passed about a year ago, he admitted maybe 6 weeks later, yeah, it was really just a climate bill. I guess we should have called it that. So it is a big scam, and I think this is the first movie to really expose it all.
It's incredible, and I think the cultural aspects too are very powerful. Like I know younger people who really believe that climate is going to like change the world in 20 years. We're going to be underwater. They don't know how long he's kept this con going. They don't know how many things in the Inconvenient Truth are fake. What's inconvenient about the Inconvenient Truth is his predictions didn't stand up, right?
Yeah, every prediction Gore made about the melting ice caps, flooding coastal cities, we got 7 years to live, it's an emergency. Every single prediction he made turned out to be bunk. It wasn't true. And instead of admitting everything is bunk, he just keeps doubling down because he just can't admit it, I guess. I mean, he lost to George Bush in 2000. That was the second time he ran for president and lost. He lost in 88. And I think, Gore was pretty much crushed by the defeat and not being able to fulfill his ambitions of his parents. So he kind of adopted this idea of being this global president of the world. And I think he probably is the most influential person in the past 50 years because he's the one that brought this climate science CO2 narrative onto the scene, and it got adopted by everybody. And no one stopped to do what I did, which is let's look into these claims that Gore introduced to the world that carbon dioxide is some kind of poison or bad gas, and we got to get rid of it. Carbon dioxide is our friend. We create it every time we exhale. It's plant food. Plants breathe it in and exhale carbon dioxide. So we have a historically low amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and we desperately need more because it produces plants, which sustains life, greens the deserts, produces more oxygen. The very premise of the idea that Gore introduced in 1992 is complete scientific bunk, and nothing Gore has said has come true.
And what's his connection to all these NGOs and these other international groups? Like, I know that he's affiliated with the World Economic Forum, but he's really tied and connected to all these other people, right?
Well, Gore, he made millions of dollars. He was like, I think they called him the world's first carbon billionaire because he joined the board of Apple and Google and made all these climate deals with the government to get billions off the government. Today, he has something to this day called the Climate Project in Nashville, Tennessee, and he trains people from all over the world to take his climate science back to their countries and try to influence those governments. He's not, I think the movement has been taken over by these political forces, the people, same old gang that wants to get rid of the free market system. They're the ones that adopted this thing because Marxists are furious that the free market system has brought wealth to the masses, including lower classes, can buy houses and cars and be wealthy from the free market system. And Marxists are furious about this. And I think they want to reverse the success of free market capitalism to validate Marxism. That's why, as much as we have it in the US, in Europe and Australia, it's about 10 times more intense in terms of how the governments are dialing back everything, cutting out energy and coal plants and farming to try to accommodate these carbon dioxide goals. And they're actually harming their economies. They're reversing the success of the free market system. So that's what it's all about today.
Wow. And they had, I think Podesta under Biden had some kind of he was a climate czar with a $200 billion slush fund. This is a friend of Gore, by the way. I think he was the chief of staff under Clinton Gore, right? But I mean,
well, John Kerry was the climate czar for quite a while. And the amount of money is just staggering. There's not billions, there's trillions being spent on these climate goals. Leftist organizations, leftist NGOs are funded by the US government to the tune of trillions of dollars. They're almost unstoppable enforcing all these ideas of the rules, and you can't have gas heaters and stoves and air conditioning. It's meant to reverse the success of the free market system. Trump, I think, is committed to trying to reverse it, but they spent so many years funding all these organizations. It's going to be quite a task to try to reverse all this stuff.
Right. I mean, he got out of the Paris Accord, and once Biden got back in, he got back into the Paris Accord, I think, right? And then shut the pipelines down and all the stuff, all according to carbon credits, climate science, so-called. Is Al Gore a cult leader? What do you think?
He's certainly the leader of this movement. He's the godfather. He brought it on the scene. He introduced it. His book, Earth in the Balance, and his 2006 film certainly was a big blockbuster, and people became convinced, even though it had so many holes in it. The biggest hole, again, is the very idea that carbon dioxide is some kind of bad gas or poisonous or harmful to the environment. It's not. You can ask any climate warrior, they can't tell you what it is really. It's only 1/3 of 1%.
Right.
And Al Gore's professor, Roger Revelle, he actually took some measurements in the 50s of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And he asked some questions, and he said, well, through the use of the industrial age and automobiles, we've probably increased carbon dioxide from 1/3 of 1% to about, 4/10, 4/10 of 1%. But he said, well, what happened to all the carbon dioxide? Where is it? I can't find it. And he assumed, and he thought, well, it was probably absorbed by the plants in the oceans. It's not trapped in the atmosphere and heating up the world like Gore said. It's complete nonsense. But you have places, for instance, Columbia University actually has a climate school now, and you can graduate from Columbia with a degree in climate. And there's corporations that will hire you to be on staff and tell them what to do to change all their free market practices to accommodate these carbon dioxide emission goals.
I mean, just to add on another question, you talked about Marxism. What's the connection between climate, quote, climate science, unquote, and centralization and central planning?
Well, the theory is, and even Gore introduced this in his book, Earth and the Balance, he said we need some kind of global governance. We need to, have a global Marshall Plan, the globalization of politics, the reduction of national borders, the reduction of nationalism and national groups. That's what communism and Marxism believe in, this big world international government under the control of these elites. So they see the whole climate change, climate science as a tool for the same old scam they've been pushing that no one would ever vote for. In order to save the planet, we need central planning. We need wealth redistribution. Let's send billions of dollars from successful free market countries to dictatorial communist countries in Africa to help them with their climate. The African countries will say, yeah, great. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll take your money. That's what it's all about.
Right. It's all there. And they're, like you said, they're ignoring all of these emissions or like emissions from factories and things like that are coming. Majority of from China, right? China and some from India. Aren't they the biggest polluters, so to speak?
Well, this is what people don't understand. There's a difference between pollution and carbon dioxide emissions. Pollution was pretty much solved in the late 70s. They cleaned up the amount of certain chemicals in fuel for passenger cars. There's no more smog in any cities. So pollution has been greatly reduced. But carbon dioxide is not pollution. It's a good gas. We need more of it. It's our friend. It's plant food. And that's how the whole thing got mixed up. Most people think carbon dioxide, it's not carbon monoxide, it's carbon dioxide, which is a good gas. And life itself would be impossible without carbon dioxide. And we need more of it to sustain agriculture and feed people.
Right, it's part of the cycle. It's part of the cycle. Humans exhale, plants inhale, exhale oxygen. We do it all. I mean, so it's really incredible. How do you think how did they successfully kind of keep the scam going with all the other science and all these other people saying, hey, there's no climate change? Like, you can see that all, like you said, his predictions didn't come true.
Well, look, everyone's being paid to agree. They say, 97% of all scientists agree. No, 97% of scientists being paid agree. Scientific gigs are difficult. It's difficult to find a gig as a scientist, and they're not steady gigs. So if you get a job at a university or the UN and they're paying you, you're gonna agree. The real scientists who aren't being paid will tell you that it's not true. And I mentioned earlier, Gore started this idea that any scientist who doesn't agree will be ostracized and lose your job and funding by attacking them and calling them climate deniers. That's how Gore treated scientists. He'd invite them into the Senate and he claimed that they're working for OPEC, Right. So they've created this kind of cult where if you don't agree, you better be quiet or you could be fired for being a denier. That's how crazy it is.
Right. It's like a denier. Like they use it in the same healthcare industry. You're a vax denier. Well, there might be science that indicates maybe these things aren't optimal. No, you're out. We're going to get your job. So it's the same kind of thing that comes from the centralized top-down kind of autocrats, really. I would say that Gore's really an autocrat. Would you agree with that?
No, Gore's a little different. See, Gore presented this for politics. He presented this thing, Earth in the Balance, an exaggerated spiritual crisis, economic, environmental crisis. He did it he thought he needed issues to become president. He thought this could be an issue that he could lead in. He didn't really foresee it as this big global movement, and that he didn't think that far ahead. He's not extremely smart. When I worked for Al Gore, I'll tell you a story that I didn't really understand. I got in an argument with Gore when I worked for him, and I didn't understand it until I made this film. And here's what happened. He invited the interns into his office just to be friendly and ask what we're studying, and had a nice talk with them. And then he said, I'm going to open the floor for questions, which was kind of weird. And one girl asked about terrorism in Israel. She said, there's been some terrorism in the Middle East. What should U.S. policy be to stop terrorism? So Gore went into about a 5-minute speech about negotiating. You got to negotiate everything, bring people to negotiate at the negotiating table and have a negotiation. And when he was done, I said, no, Senator Gore, I think what she's asking is, what should be the U.S. policy to deter terrorism? What should our policy be so it wouldn't happen in the first place? And he looks over at me and he yells at me. He says, what would you do? Just bomb everybody? I got in my face and shouted at me. I couldn't believe it. So I said back to him, I said, well, Senator Gore, I don't know what I would do, but when I'm a U.S. Senator one day, I'll have a policy. And everyone was kind of shocked. I kind of felt bad about it because you're not really supposed to, talk back to him. And but I was kind of in shock that he reacted to me like that when I asked him to clarify what the hell he was talking about. So I only understood that behavior when I saw him bring in the scientists to the U.S. Senate hearings and attack them and say, you're working for OPEC. You're like the cigarette manufacturers. Anybody that doesn't agree with him, he just attacks them without addressing the real issue. So that's how the climate warriors are today. It's like a religion. You agree with them or you're a heretic. And we're all original sinners because we use electricity or we use gasoline. We use resources. And if you want to be good, you can gain salvation through sustainability. So if you buy an electric car, you're good. If you don't, then you're a heretic. And that's the way they think about it.
Right. No, but it's pervaded the whole culture. It's really incredible. I know people who worked on his campaign, presidential campaign, I guess, what was it, 92 or 88? And he talked about his dad. He would have like weird talks. My dad, blah, blah, blah. And in weird, like non sequitur environments, like it didn't follow on with
well,
what
his
they
dad,
were.
his dad was in on both campaigns. He was right in the center of it. He was campaigning for him. He was a strategist. So his father was a good politician and Gore was not. And Gore understood that. He knew he was not a good politician and needed a lot of help. And the biggest help he needed, again, was issues. He knew he couldn't sell himself to the voter, but he thought, if I have this issue, I could be the leader and they'll vote for me because of the issue.
Right.
That's why I got into it.
The wooden Apollo reference I thought was very telling. Like,
Yeah.
I think that kind of fits his personality. People called him, for FYI, in the film, they called him that at St. Albans. Like, he's always kind of a stiff, like, and always never had really great grades. He was never known as an academic kind of superstar. So I think that's kind of telling.
No, look, when I met him, when I worked with him in U.S. Senate, people asked me, what's it like to work with Al Gore? And I would tell them he's a very shallow person. There's no depth to him. Whatever he talks on the surface, that's it. He doesn't have a lot of depth to his character or his personality. It's very shallow. And when I made this film and learned quite a lot more about him, that impression held up. He really is not a very smart person. And that's why when he came up with this book, Earth in the Balance, he had to lie about the source. And I think that's the major revelation that blows the lid off the whole climate science narrative, because we find out the very idea that there's too much CO2, it did not come from some guy at Harvard. It was made up by an author in the 1940s and these environmental extremist radical professors he had at Divinity School. That's where it came from, but he couldn't tell us that at the time because no one would have listened to him.
Wow. Joel, where's the best place for people to see your film?
Yeah, if you go to climatealgore.com, the website climatealgore.com, you can see the movie trailer, and it'll link you up to where you can live stream the movie or buy the DVD, climatealgore.com.
And your other films, too, they're still available. You have a website, right?
Yeah, all
in
my
addition to
films
this.
are. Yeah, I've made about 15 or 16 documentary feature films on the Middle East, on Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, Donald Trump, Bob Dylan, Middle East politics. Go to Highway 61 ENT for entertainment. Highway61ENT.com.
Highway61ENT.com, so people can see
Correct.
your other films. And
Correct.
then this one is climatealgore.com
Correct.
for this specific film. And if people have any follow-up questions or want to reach out to you, where's the best place to do that?
Yeah, just do it on climatealgore.com. There's a contact page. I'm happy to answer any questions. climatealgore.com.
Awesome. Well, great job with the film. I think it's really important because they're just hammering people with this whole climate change nonsense. And it's really affected the world. I mean, it's not just American society or culture. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you made the film. Again, the director's name is Joel Gilbert, Gilbert. And the film he just put out released December 2024.
It just came out.
Just came out. The Climate According to Al Gore, AI Al Gore. So the Climate According to AI Al Gore. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks for having me.
All right, stay there.